hope this is on air. If you guys are listening to this, can you just tweet me just to make sure all this is in working order? I should be broadcasting. The dashboard says I'm broadcasting, so okay. Hopefully all this is going live. But yeah, I've been doing a lot of landscaping, picking a lot of fruit. I have a lemon tree, kumquat tree, a loquat tree, avocado tree, a couple apple trees. I have an orange tree in the back. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff to pick. I've just been giving it out to friends and family. I also have my own little herb garden that I've been taking care of. I don't know, probably the better part of the last month. Oh, by the way, please visit twitter.com/Jindo, youtube.com/Jindo, bitshoot.com/Jindo if you want to follow along. My last episode I did was about the biogeography zones or eco zones, specifically the Palearctic and the Indo-Malayan zone, which the reason why I was talking about that was because of the episode centered around the demographic history of modern day China, because modern day China occupies two of those eco zones. And so there's that entire episode, a pretty fascinating episode, if I have to say so myself. I recommend you guys go back and check that out. A lot of stuff was covered there. But today, what I have for you is kind of a continuation of the last week. So last week, if you guys weren't here last week, I talked a lot about the Cosmic Tusk interview with Wickrama Singh and George Howard. I re-uploaded that to my YouTube channel. Haven't uploaded it to BitChute yet. I think there's an issue with BitChute right now where I'm trying to upload stuff, but it's not it's not going through the post-processing phase. I don't know what the deal is. I do know that BitChute is still an emerging platform, so there are a few bugs and kinks and stuff that need to be worked out. But there's been kind of like a log jam of stuff that I've already uploaded that hasn't been uploaded to BitChute. So hopefully that stuff rights itself. But these longer radio broadcasts, these Friday ones, are significantly larger than my other videos on the channel, my normal videos, which tend to range between 15 to maybe 30 minutes sometimes. So they're not as big, whereas these are 2 hours. So it takes a long time to re-upload all that stuff, especially on BitChute. So hopefully that writes itself. But I am very hopeful of the BitChute platform. I am a big fan of it. I like the layout. I like the philosophy behind it. I like how anybody at any time, no matter who it is, can upload stuff without fear of being censored. And also BitChute has a nice support option. There's a button where you can just donate right away. It's a little $, which I get a lot of questions about how people can support the channel. Because again, this is entirely self-funded. This is entirely just me. I have no team behind me. This radio platform was provided to me by Grimerica FM. Those guys are awesome. They've graciously extended this platform to me. But other than that, though, I'm not getting any money from anyone. But if you do, you can go onto my BitChute channel, go to any of the videos, and click that $, and you could you could send me cryptocurrency through coin payments, or you can send me like $5 on PayPal or $1 on PayPal, whatever it is, whatever you feel like. But anyway, so yeah, last week I talked a lot about the Wickrama Singh interview with George Howard regarding the cosmic virus, or the cosmic origins of virus. And the Wickrama Singh is basically talking about COVID-19, but in specifics. But I wasn't really focused on that part. I was focused on the more broader angle that he was taking regarding just how all viruses originate from space, essentially the vacuum of space, and we're constantly bombarded on Earth with these Viruses, constantly, all the time. The ocean's full of them, mountaintops, pretty much everywhere at all times. We're being bombarded with new or novel viruses. So that was a pretty huge episode, and I spent a huge chunk of time last week's show talking about that. And some other stuff that I talked about last week were the rest of the pre-Clovis sites of South America. We talked about Pedro Ferrada site, which was up. That was a direct. I guess that was like part 3 of 2 weeks ago when I talked about the Santa Elena rock shelter site. The week before that, which was the second site that I was talking about. The week before that, we were talking about Monte Verde, which is one of the more famous South American pre-Clovis sites. And then we went a little bit into the Pedro Pintada site, which I think I'll probably go over it really quick in the next segment. And then the biggest one, though, the big thing that I wanted to get to last week that I couldn't was the Terra Preta, the idea of Terra Preta, the man-made soil that suddenly appears in the Amazon, quote, suddenly. So we're going to talk about all the properties of that, their properties of self-regeneration, how it provided abundance for and support for these huge numbers that we talked about. I think about a month ago, I talked about the Carvajal, his journal, and the conquistadors who first traversed the length of the Amazon back in the 1700s, and what they reported and all those numbers. And Terra Preta seems to be the main physical mechanism, the tool, the life source in which they're able to have these high yields of food to sustain numbers. I'm talking like 8 million, 10 million, 15 million population sizes of these cities, of the average city, not even their biggest city, which people say may have been upwards of 20 to 30 million people, which is just, in terms of mainstream archaeology, is just unheard of. So we'll be talking a lot about Terra Preta today. Other things we'll talk about, of course, at the bottom of the second hour, we'll always get to listener comments. And some of the stuff I retweet a lot of stuff on Twitter, and I just never seem to get around to talking about it in any of the videos, but they're all great articles. So I'll probably dedicate a solid, probably 35 minutes talking about that. But starting in the next hour, we will talk about Pedro Pintada. This is a great site, and this was excavated in 1996. Has many layers that indicate Holocene and early Holocene, late Pleistocene occupation. Very, very interesting stuff that was going around at the last glacial maximum, and it leaves the door open for even older interpretation of the site that would push back these dates close to 30, 40, even 50,000 years ago, guys. So all that's coming up. There's no quote of the week this week. I know last week I did that quote, and a lot of you guys seem to have liked that quote. I thought it was great. And that was the privilege to grow older, right? How getting older shouldn't be looked at as negative, but it's something that should be respected, right? It's something that should be embraced. And we talked a little bit about that, and I felt like I was getting a little preachy, but really it's kind of hard not to when you're talking about quotes like that. But if you guys have any, you guys can send those over to me too. I definitely like reading those. There's a ton of them, actually. I didn't prepare that part of the show this week. I was going to do a Marcus Aurelius quote, but he has a ton of quotes as well. If you're into Stoic philosophy, I would highly recommend you go back and read that. There's a lot to be gained, actually, from reading the old classic literature and the ancient Greek philosophers. I think there's a lot of stuff to be gained. Granted, they weren't right about everything. They were wrong about a lot of stuff too, and I don't agree with everything Plato says, or I definitely don't agree with everything that Aristotle said either. But it's important to read those guys because they're kind of they're basically a direct precursor to Western civilization, and it's good to learn from the mistakes of your forefathers, the forebears, and they went through something very similar to us. They had their government's pretty similar to ours. I'm talking about Western civilization, not just America. They went through very similar issues, and just being able to read and see how they interpreted, how they handled those issues, what they came away with, and all the scandalous stuff that happened in between. I just think it's worth reading all that stuff. So it's definitely not a waste of time. It's definitely relevant, very much relevant to this day, especially more relevant than just what's out there now. It's kind of, speaking of which, I think I was going to save this for another show or like another podcast or something, but I might as well talk about this now. And there's a lot of junk out there, and especially right now in media. If you guys are glued to, I'm sure a lot of you are glued to not the TV, but like your news feed, or not. I'm not even just talking about mainstream. It just seems like the news cycle now is just the same thing over and over again. And I'm not alone in this, but I do feel like I'm living in Groundhog Day. Basically, every day is pretty much the same. Especially, and then when you read the news, it's very similar as well. You know, it's just the same themes over and over again. And yes, I am talking about this virus. I'm talking about all the conspiracy theories that come with it, all the shady stuff that comes with it. And I'm not telling people to zone out, to plug themselves out of this or anything. I mean, obviously, you guys should do what you need to do in order to maintain your sanity. But for me, I just feel like it hasn't been helpful, and it's just added a lot of subconscious stress in my life, and in my mind. So that's part of the reason why I've just been retreating into yard work and working in my garden, and taking care of my dogs, just because it's a nice baseline. You know, it's a nice baseline for my mind. It keeps me focused. It keeps me motivated. And it keeps me away from some of the overly complicated and quite frankly, fear mongering of the chat of this internet chatter, right? Another thing I'd recommend people do is just get lost in books. If you guys need to read off of like an audiobook or like an ebook, like on your iPad, that's fine too. Just get into a lot of offline material. I think a lot of offline material is very helpful, and yeah. So just get into, if you guys are struggling to find anything, I'd recommend Marcus Aurelius for sure. He's one of the Stoic philosophers, one of the great emperors of Rome. He was I think the third one of the four. Yeah, there's like Trajan and I think Hadrian and Marcus Aurelius, and the first one, I forget who the first one is. But yeah, anyway, that's about it for that. So we are about at the end of this first segment here. So yeah, so if you guys are listening, really send me those articles, send me those links. There's a lot that I got to get to. You guys were really active in the wake of last week's, not only last week's broadcast, but a couple days ago when I posted that China thing. You guys were just all over that. So please send me more articles, some more comments. And in the next hour, we will talk about the Pedro Pintada site first. We'll just go over Anna Roosevelt's work from University of Illinois, her excavation process and what she found. And then from there, we'll go into Terra, Preta, and some of this other stuff in South America. The second segment of the day, that was the Kings of Crunk, Lil Jon and the East Side Boys. I'm sure you guys know what that song is. I don't know why I played that, but I played it. So it's a great song, by the way. Great I guess, enlightening lyrics. Really, very basic, but very thought-provoking nonetheless. So, uh, so we're gonna continue. This is the last pre-Clovis site we're gonna go over for this series. I've been doing this pre-Clovis site series on the radio. So we, like I mentioned before, we talked about Pedro Ferrata, we talked about Monte Verde, we talked about the Santa Elena rock shelter. But none of these are in the Amazon basin, right? Monte Verde again is in Chile. Santa Elena is a lot more south in the Amazon basin. But this site that we're going to talk about now, that I've the Pedro Pintada site, basically. I didn't go over a lot of it last week, so I wanted to really get into this. So basically, if the other three sites did not throw the monkey wrench into the mainstream, which, by the way, I guess I'll say it again here, the mainstream views South America as not being peopled until about 1,000 years ago or so, a little bit before 1,000 years ago. Very, very recent is what they think. This will throw a huge. If all the other sites haven't already, this will. So, it is. The other thing I did go over a few weeks ago was this is an enormous area of land, right? I'm not just talking about the Amazon basin. I'm talking about all of South America. But very little archaeology has been done in this area. And I did make the comparison last time that if you look at a place like Guatemala, which is a fraction of the surface area of the Amazon basin, what little work the work that they did in Guatemala yielded so many different finds about the Maya and about pretty much everything we know about the pre-Columbian civilization in the area. So it stands to reason that in light of everything that we've heard, all the rumors, Carvajal's journal, all of these ancient accounts of there being huge cities in the area, these huge, seemingly advanced cities, stretching far back into antiquity, and we don't know how far. It stands to reason that if a group with the adequate amount of resources were to excavate and scan LiDAR, all of these things, find these appropriate sites to excavate and look into, there stands to reason that there'd be a lot that they'd find. So this Pedro Pintada site is, again, another red flag that people, or green light rather, a green light for people who are interested. And if you're an archaeologist looking for a place to excavate, this is probably your best bet here. And what am I talking about? Pedro Pintada. So, if this is another rock shelter, okay? It's located along the confluence of the Tapajos and Amazon rivers. Okay, I think I mentioned this. I mentioned that much last week, I'm pretty sure. So this is right in the heart of the Amazon basin. This is probably a relic of a past age in which there was just, again, flourishing cities and stuff like that. And it makes sense, right? If you look at the Euphrates and Tigris rivers, if you look at other, like the Nile River Valley, it seems to be that humans, especially ancient humans, are attracted to these sites. They build huge cities at these sites. They tend to flourish. They tend to have rich histories, and with rich history and success comes with technological innovation, all of these things. And we will get into one of the biggest technologies that they've had. Probably in the next hour, or the next segment, rather, we'll talk about Terra Preta, which again will help to fill in all of these gaps of understanding in terms of how they sustain these huge populations in these cities. So anyway, so this focuses on Anna Roosevelt. Okay, she's a professor of anthropology at the University of Illinois. We talked about her in weeks ago in different. On different subjects. or in different segments and on the different broadcasts that we did. So back in '96, she and a group of researchers published stuff in Science. Okay, the publication Science, April 19th, 1996. So on that day, they published stuff about their excavation of multiple occupation layers, which span the Holocene, right, which is what we live in now, and the late Pleistocene, right? So the oldest and deepest turning out to be as old as 16,000 years. So this is according to thermoluminescence dating. And then 14,200 years according to radiocarbon dating. So this is from that article, okay? Quote, the human presence at Caverna de Pedra Pintada during the late Pleistocene is established by numerous artifacts. The dated materials are associated in a stratigraphic context at the beginning of a long cultural sequence, okay? There is no pre-human biological material that could have mixed with the cultural remains, which are stratigraphically separated from later Holocene assemblages by a culturally sterile layer. So I think I mentioned this briefly last time or a few weeks ago. So they found a long cultural sequence, meaning a long period of activity in the layers, the deeper layers. And then as you go up into the shallower layers, that seems to disappear. There seems to be no cultural remains for a few layers. And then in the later Holocene, activity starts to ramp up again, and they start to see it in the more shallow layers, which means, of course, the more shallow it is, the more recent it is. The discovery of Paleo-Indians along the Amazon confirms earlier evidence that the Paleo-Indian radiation, that means the Paleo-Indian presence of people, was more complex than current theories provide for. So back in '96, she was leaving the door open for an even more ancient civilization. Now, again, she's an academic, so she really couldn't go much further than that without any more smoking gun evidence. But she did. This is a very, very important aside that she makes, because she's basically saying that there's a bunch of material in the older levels that, again, she hadn't dug deeper in, but she did say that, yeah, there's some human activity back here that seems seemingly unrelated to the Paleo-Indian, quote, radiation that we see now, that we attribute everything to now. So with that in mind, this site is very important because, again, this is one of the very, very few sites that in the Amazon basin that was excavated. In 1996, that was what, 24 years ago, right? Is my math correct on that? Yeah, 24 years ago. I mean, they haven't, there's a lot of stuff that needs to be excavated, especially along the confluence of those two rivers, the Amazon and the Tapajos rivers. So again, 5.5 million square kilometers of the Amazon basin is still covered in rainforest. Okay. So there's a lot of stuff that's still sitting there. It's not going anywhere, right? It's still underground. But the academics have got to, get hip to this and really put some money into this. And I think that's going to happen. That is going to happen for sure. I talked about other areas that may have promising results too in terms of excavation, like Antarctica is a big one. Sahara Desert, I talked about that. Of course, the Amazon, even places in India, right? Places in India they found the Indus Valley civilization, but there really isn't much else. There's the underwater city of Dwarka, which for a long time, along with Troy, the city of Troy, was thought to have been myth, right? And then they found those. So very interesting stuff, guys. I highly recommend you guys look into more of that. And of course, I mentioned Guatemala and how Guatemala was basically they decided to dig holes there and just see what they could find, and they found basically everything we know about the Maya and stuff. They found a complex there, and if you guys look on a map right now, I'm not sharing screen or anything right now, but if you just look up Guatemala, just the square footage of Guatemala, and compare it to the Amazon basin, it's just a dwarf. It's nothing compared to in terms of size. So again, all of this implies a civilization capable of not only large-scale agriculture and advanced stage of development, but all of this our archaeologists aren't prepared to accept any of this yet. Although there are more and more, like Bruce Patton isn't an archaeologist, but he might as well be one because he's got so much knowledge. But people like him and archaeologists that he's actually working with, they're starting to turn to this. So again, there's a the new generation is finally coming up. So, all right, that's about it for the Pedra Pintada site. If you guys want to look up more information about Pedra Pintada, just you guys should look up some of Anna Roosevelt's work from U of Illinois. I think some of those journals are should be out and available for the public to read. I'd highly recommend you guys go back and read up on that. And again, I think she might be gearing up for another excavation because of we have so much more useful technology now than in 1996. They did have thermoluminescence, but now we have scanning technology. We can basically use LiDAR just to see where we can find peculiar formations in the geography or in the topography, and we can just pick some of the more likely sites to excavate. And we can do all that within a fraction of the time that it would take to conduct a classic, more conventional dig. So again, there's a lot of stuff out there, and we have a lot of tools at our disposal. And seeing as how the government printed $6 trillion, I don't see why we can't just fund a little bit to find out more. Obviously, I'm joking about that. Well, I'm not joking about the printing the money thing, but you know, it seems to stand that the government anyway has other plans with that money. But I think it would be a really useful endeavor to look further into the confluence of these two rivers, especially just along the entire basin, just to see what they find. Because again, we should put to rest Carvajal's notion. All those early conquistadors, we should see once and for all, were they right? Were they bullshitting or not? And I think basically everything that we went over the past month or so of this broadcast, almost a month and a half now, there was a ton of stuff. There was a ton of stuff that has been overlooked. So again, it seemed there's nothing that threw the monkey wrench into Carvajal's journal and his account and the conquistadors' account of all these people, gold, abundance, all of these things. Yeah, it just makes a lot of sense that there was some truth to what they were saying. Because again, on the flip side, why would they lie about this stuff? They didn't gain anything from writing this. It was just their account was locked in a library somewhere for 150, whatever, almost 200 years, until in the late 1800s someone dug it up out of the library. So again, there are other things too. Maybe they were capable of oceanic voyages. Maybe there was a connection between South America and Egypt, right? And even Göbekli Tepe. There are all these similar, even Easter Island too. There are similar architecture, similar symbols, similar ways in which their society was set up. So again, in the next segment, we're going to talk about Terra Preta and how or Black Earth, Amazonian Black Earth, whatever it is you want to call it. We're going to go into a huge segment on that after the segment. So stay tuned. All right, everybody, we are back. We are back to this segment. We're going to talk about Terra Preta. So Terra Preta is this man-made soil that suddenly appears in the Amazon, and there's a lot of mystery surrounding what exactly it is. But even though there's all this mystery, it's been downplayed, and they think that it was just a byproduct of just basically these huge midden piles, which again, if you don't know what midden piles are, it's basically ancient trash heaps left by populations of people who were settling an area for an extended amount of time. So of course they didn't have trash men or anything like that we know of. So they left these things in a pile, and so it's just it's been explained away by academics as just this again, this byproduct of a somewhat flourishing population. Which again, there's all kinds of problems with that, because there have been midden piles in other parts of the world that doesn't have any of this Terra Preta, this black earth, so to speak, that is has properties of self-regeneration, right? It allows a population of between 8 to even 30 million people to thrive for years. Okay, and very little is understood about this. But again, not a lot of work has been done into examining this. So we're going to talk a lot about Terra Preta and why it's so important in the investigation of these ancient civilizations. And I think it plays a huge piece in terms of the evidence for the case of these huge populations. Because again, the main criticism is that these populations, it's unsustainable. There's no way. But there is a way. Okay, so the first thing that we have to talk about is how jungle soil is not very good at maintaining its nutrients and farming off of that land. It's just not ideal soil. And I believe the ancients would know this too. So that right away, there's a use case. There's a reason why they would need Terra Preta in the first place. So there's a glaring hole that the ancients would need to fill, right? They would need some sort of agent, something to let them, grow their food and take advantage of their location. Because again, they were in a prime area to grow stuff. It's just that the jungle soil is not good. It's not great for growing stuff. And there's a name for that, which I can't remember off the top of my head. So the reason why I saved Terra Preta for later is because we've now finally established that the Pedra Pintada site, all of these sites, these painted rock shelters, they all but indicate that there was some sort of activity, some sort of human activity almost 50,000 years ago, right? Because, if you just in a nutshell, if you find paintings that date back at least 40,000, 50,000 years ago, it stands to reason that there are people there who painted that, and there are people there who had the time and wherewithal to paint that, right? So again, they found it important enough so that suggests a lot of things. Okay, so with that in mind, okay, and with the mind that there are other painted rock shelters in this area, and there are probably more that we haven't even found yet. It suggests some sort of greater antiquity from the Amazon, right? But here's the next logical question: what greater antiquity? Where did they come from, right? What was it? Were they like the Sumerian kings and the Sumerian kings list? Was it Quetzalcoatl? Was it some of these other bearded figures, Viracocha, whatever it is, right? Was it that, or were they just hunter-gatherers, right? Was it foragers and hunter-gatherers all the way back? See, there's a huge mystery here, right? So, and also there's the Australasian genes, right? The question of that, right? The Australasian genes in the Amazon, what role do they play in this ancient civilization, this pre-Columbian, pre-Clovis civilization? So, a few episodes ago, I talked about the exemplary agronomy that David Wilkinson from UCLA talked about. Basically means they had really advanced agriculture, just unprecedented in the world at the time. So again, I mentioned earlier that rainforests do not have good base soil to sustain their fertility in the mulch of plants. So that's why this artificial man-made soil of Terra Preta comes in, and it inexplicably appears in the Amazon thousands of years ago. And it has these properties of self-regeneration, still used for agriculture to this day, by the way. Right now, it's understood by scholars to have been responsible for the astonishing and utterly anomalous, okay, these are the words of Graham Hancock here, this is his quote, agricultural productivity that allowed a population estimated at between 8 to 20 million people to thrive for untold epochs, right? So if we just assume that this is true, then what else did they know, right? And then, of course, history happens, European conquest, and all this stuff gets wiped out, right? But until then, they were thriving using this soil, right? And how did they reach this scientific achievement? What's the story behind this? So let's go into history. So this was first reported by the Europeans, right, in colonial era Brazil, and they called it Terra Preta de Indio, right, Indian Black Earth, basically. So they were talking about this in the 1700s. They were also talking about abundant pottery shards that were obviously pre-Columbian, because some of the locals were saying that these were pre-Columbian. These were before their time as well. The Incas come to mind, right? The Incas, they were asked about Machu Picchu, and they said they didn't build that. That was already there. It was built by their forebears, right? So I think, much like Machu Picchu, this Terra Preta, again, not Machu Picchu is in the Peruvian highlands, but still, these harken back to a more ancient time, and this is well known. Okay, this isn't anything new. This is well known by the conquistadors 300 plus years ago. So this Terra Preta consisted of fine, dark loam, a foot and often 2 feet thick. They call the other words for this, not just Black Earth, not just Terra Preta, ADE's Amazonian Dark Earth, okay, or I guess is what the mainstream archaeologists call it. So, terra firme. Terra firme is what they called the jungle soils of the Amazon, floodplain soils. And again, they were too poor to sustain intensive agriculture, and thus insignificant in terms of feeding a large scale population, right? So with few available nutrients and having extremely high aluminum concentrations, this terra firma just couldn't provide enough agriculture and enough food for these people. So the floodplains with their better soils are high risk areas, right? So there are these areas of floodplains that were up until recently the basis of which they would attribute these populations to. But again, this wouldn't work either. These floodplains, the surface area is not enough. There's not enough areas to produce enough crops to sustain these cities. But secondly, they're high risk, meaning they didn't know the flood regime. It was too unpredictable. So imagine you're a farmer and you're farming, and suddenly there's just a flash flood or whatever, and it just all your work is gone, and you got to start it over again. If it allows, who knows how long the floods would last either. So it's too unpredictable. It's not stable enough to really build a civilization off of. So again, that's where this comes in. We talked about the reports of these dense settlements for kilometers and kilometers along these river bluffs, these roadways I talked about, that Carvajal talked about as well, that branched out into more inland away from the riversides and into the actual basin, that the heart of Amazonia. And again, all along these roads were, a lot of these terraced farms and all these things for miles and miles and miles. And that's not going to just be done with floodplain and other soils. So the remnants of some of these settlements are now being investigated by these researchers that I mentioned before. So they refer to them as garden cities, sometimes botanical cities. But again, these garden cities have acres and acres of this black earth. So because of that, they have heightened fertility, right? They have a higher potential to have these ungodly yields of food. And the indigenous people, the important thing is the indigenous people confirm all this. They talk about all this. The Spaniards talk about it. The Spaniards were saying that the locals 300 years ago were talking about these expanses of Terra Preta. So what's the area then? What's the scale that we're talking about here in terms of Terra Preta? Well, some have said 6,000 kilometers squared. Some have said 150,000 kilometers square. And others say the size of France, which is about 640,000 kilometers square of this Terra Preta. That's a lot of black Earth, guys. That's huge. How long would it take to even make that? If we were to understand how they made it, is it just one machine making it or something, or is it, how long would it have taken to just even at a grassroots level to spread all that stuff around? See, this is just, see what I mean about this? It just unlocks a door to even more possibilities. Because again, the logistics of that, of just spreading all of that black Earth is just, it seems like a logistical nightmare, right? But if it's part of a culture, a grassroots culture that grew with that, and they just spread those practices, assuming uninterrupted from war, famine, pestilence, comet impact, climate, all of these things, assuming uninterrupted. I mean, how long would it take to really get an area the size of France or even bigger full and stockpiled of this magic soil, right? That's something that should be, I think, investigated. So let's focus on the southeastern Amazon, all right, near the Xingu River. And if you guys want a Google Earth Q, go ahead. The Xingu River, Xingu River, in southeastern Amazonia. Recent study found that existing settlements on a much smaller scale than in the past are still able to survive largely because of accomplishments of their ancestors who had continuously occupied, managed, and modified the soils over thousands of years. Okay? So the river people of the Xingu today, all right, they inhabit and plant in dark earth. Okay? And they grow stuff like Brazil nuts. They have a ton of different vine. And if you guys don't know about Brazil nuts, that's a very high maintenance, high nutrient dense food that requires, again, a lot of, TLC, right? You need to have a lot of focus on growing those plants, and having something like Terra Preta enables that. It has the nutrients. It provides all that stuff. So, contemporary land use and resource management in the Xingu corridor is how they call it, significantly conditioned or made possible by mostly little studied prehistoric land use practices. Again, little studied land use practices. And I wonder why that's little studied, because that's a huge green light, right? I mean, all this stuff was found many, many decades ago, guys. It's not like this is all new and that they just didn't have adequate amount of time to respond. It's more so that they're tiptoeing around this because it more than likely will force them, and I'm talking about the mainstream here, to revise their thought, in order to integrate this new data, it would require them to rewrite their entire history, and it would invalidate a lot of stuff that it would invalidate their soapbox that they're standing on, essentially, and they would have to start over. But that's what science is about. You're supposed to start over in light of new information. And again, I feel like a broken record. I talk about this all the time. So this little studied and poorly understood practices of prehistoric land use, right? Nobody doubts that they are anthropogenic, meaning that they're man-made. It's pretty much all in agreement that they're man-made, right? Everyone agrees that they've pulled these people into agricultural success. But how was it made? Why was it made? When was it made? Who made it? Right? These are all important questions, right? So It's often dug up by villagers along the Xingu River. That part we know. There are patches of ancient Terra Preta everywhere, especially where they plant their crops. And a crazy thing is, they encounter potsherds, stone axes, ceramics, and figurines in this soil. Okay, this left behind by people from the remote past. Okay, so this is these two are connected here. Okay, these artifacts. So that indicates that not only do the indigenous people know where to find this black earth and that they're using it, but it's been being used forever. Other things that they find, other ingredients that they find in there are obvious compost, feces, urine of humans and animals, all sorts of organic waste. This is where the midden pile thing comes in. Bones, and mostly fish bones. So fish bones tend to play a huge role in this. So again, like I mentioned earlier, these researchers now, they believe these soils formed as composted material accumulated via incidental human activity, these debris piles, right? Midden piles, shit piles, essentially. And that's it. They just think it's human and animal excrement. And the argument, their argument revolves around these ancient Amazonians living around these, quote, middenscapes, dumping all their trash into these piles, burning wet vegetation on top of these shit piles, and making sure that the fires are damped down under a blanket of dirt and straw. This is basically the explanation of Tom Miles. Tom Miles is he calls it slash and char, basically, which is different from slash and burn techniques, which I'm sure you guys have heard of slash and burn techniques, where they would just cut everything, burn it, and then reuse it later. This is a version of that, right? But except it's cool burning. This is their explanation, okay? In slash and burn, dry brush and grass are burned in open fires, spewing vast quantities of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere and leaving only small amounts of nutrients in the ash that's then dug into the ground. By contrast, slash and char involves burning wet vegetation, so it smolders underneath a layer of dirt and straw. Robbed of oxygen, the fire only partly burns any wood and stalks, leaving most as tiny chunks of charcoal. This biochar is then turned into the soil that we know of as Terra Preta, and this transforms into ADE, the world's most fertile soil. And that's it. That's basically the explanation, and there you go. Even though it's not been recreated or anything like that, but I don't think that is Terra Preta at all, because that would, and it just doesn't make any sense. And if anything, it's probably the other way around. Right? It's probably that there was, in order for the midden piles to get as big as they were with all this vegetation and stuff, they had to have the soil in the first place to sustain that, to even produce that large of midden piles in the first place. And again, if you want to say, well, a lot of it's fish bones, yeah, but who had to fish up all those fish bones? I mean, you needed a big population to begin with. How do you get a big population? Well, you need to have a bunch of food. How do you get a bunch of food? You need good soil. So I think it's backwards here, right? It's not an accidental byproduct of these midden piles. It can't be, because of everything I just explained right now. It contains just because it contains all those things doesn't make it that's the exact explanation, right? There's another possibility though. This soil was probably invented, right? They made excellent use of freely available local resources as an ingenious, low-tech, and environmentally friendly way to increase agricultural yield. And again, if you want to talk about the genius, if you want to dispute the genius of the ancients, look no further than the architecture. Look no further than everything, all of these anomalies that are left. Okay. So again, it's very possible that they invented something like this. If they're capable of making astronomical alignments, building pyramids, these megalithic structures, why couldn't they invent some sort of soil that allow a regenerative soil? Right? This is something that we can't even do today. And that midden pile explanation is just so, it just doesn't, it's not parsimonious. It doesn't make much sense here. So again, this low-tech and environmentally friendly way to increase agricultural yield in areas that would otherwise not have been able to sustain agriculture. Again, this wouldn't have been, none of these populations would have existed without a lot of food. And thus large populations, even for a few decades, or even a few thousand years, they would have this ability to, this miraculous ability to sustain these people. So again, this is a classic case of being swept under the rug and just this piss poor explanation that no one has revisited. So this is Professor Antoinette Winkler Prince. Okay, he's the director for environmental studies at JHU, Johns Hopkins University. This is what he says. What has been mysterious about these soils is their ability to persist in a landscape that common ecological knowledge would dictate they could not. Okay, why then have ADEs dated to have formed up to 2,500 years ago continue to exist? Yeah, and it's not just 2,500 years ago. It's way further than that. Okay, so here's her question. Here's how she answers her question. The unique nature of the carbon in these soils is the key to the stability of the organic matter in ADEs, Black Earth, and the key to the mystery of the persistence of ADEs in this landscape. Okay, so basically, this biochar, okay, the explanation for all these qualities of Terra Preta is in this biochar that gives the soil its darkness, okay? It's produced, again, rather than hot burning, this organic matter in oxygen-poor environment. Although it's not properly understood, the particles of char produced this way are somehow able to gather up nutrients in water that might have otherwise be washed down below the reach of the roots. So again, there's a lot of, I guess, weird twists here that aren't being properly explained, right? So again, another professor of anthropology, William Ballet from Tulane, okay, he adds that microbial activity leads to increased carbon sequestration, okay, and that ADE is richer and more diverse in microbes than surrounding soils, even though millions of these species remain to be identified precisely, and literally 1 million separate taxa can be contained in only 10 grams of soil. So again, a huge proportion of the microbes in this Black Earth are different from the microbes in the surrounding older soils. Okay, so how do we explain this discrepancy here between these two different soils? Why are these soils so jam-packed with these interesting microbes that we can't recreate today? That's a huge question mark, and I'll leave that with you. We got to take a break, but I'll leave that for you guys to marinate. These millions and millions of microbes in just 10 grams of soil. Okay, that has a huge factor in its reusability and its properties of replenishment. This is really hard to understand if you guys have never grown anything, but if you do grow stuff, you do understand that soil has a finite amount of nutrients before you have to replenish it with fertilizer and all of that stuff, right? This Terra Preta did not require that. Okay, it's still used to this day, thousands and thousands of years. It still has the gas to provide these nutrients. Okay, that is not created just simply by midden piles, guys. So I'll leave you guys there to marinate on for the next 5 minutes, and then we'll pick back up and go into the more technical understanding of what this could possibly be. Welcome back to we're a little bit past the top of the hour. I kind of went a little bit over the last segment, but there's just so much to cover when it comes to Terra Preta and all of this stuff, generally speaking. So we left off with the nutrient dense, the microbe dense soil. Again, these are soils that go, guys, I can't highlight enough the fact that these soils are ancient. These are the same ones that are being used back in the late Pleistocene, guys. This is an extraordinary piece of the puzzle here. I mean, these people had the tools, the wherewithal, the mathematics, the science to have a sustainable advanced civilization, and there's really no other way of putting that. And we have the legacy of that, and the physical legacy of it. It still survives to this day, and it's still poorly understood, right? So there are others. There have been so far what we've been going over are these various studies that analyze bits and pieces of it, but they don't really get to the heart of it. Another one of these studies is that focuses on this microbial vigor, so to speak, and the utility of this soil. Is the examination of its connection to fire, basically. So fire contributes charcoal and ash, which increases the soil pH, which suppresses aluminum activity toxic to plant roots and soil microbiota. So aluminum is basically a plant killer, essentially. It's not great for the plant system. It robs the soil of its nutrients. So what fire does is tries to counterbalance that, right? Fire also increases the capacity of the soils to retain nutrients, thus maintaining a synergistic cycle of continued fertility, right? So that's why this slash and burn, the burning of the middens and all that stuff. This is why we have this patchwork theory of where it comes from, but it doesn't get to the heart of it, right? So Professor Winkler Prince, okay, I mentioned her in the last segment. The microbial complexes associated with ADEs are poorly understood and quite mysterious. She says that, right? Likewise, even authors of the shitscape, middenscape theory of ADE formation admit that despite the importance of research on Terra Preta, we still lack a firm understanding of the specific formation processes that led to the diversity inherent in these anthrosols, which again is just the fancy word for the soil. So basically, in a nutshell, this is explained away as incidental byproducts of human activity. These just happened without any planning or deliberation or design. So this is the package that we have to work with. These ideas that supposedly give comfort to the archaeologists, who's, again, they've done as far as academia goes and theories and explanations go, they've done they've bent over backwards, they've done twists and turns just to convince themselves that there could never have been any cities in the Amazon that could have been huge, that could have been to the scale of what Carvajal and the conquistadors were saying and reporting. But then this paradigm shift is happening, right? They can't stop it, right? And their unwillingness to go this extra mile to view Terra Preta as a agent of fertility, as a miracle tool, essentially, is, again, it's something that they're going to have to accept. Okay, they're not going to turn Terra Preta into this downplayed thing that kind of like the pyramids now, the water erosion of the Sphinx, all that stuff is downplayed. But eventually, once all this is out and it becomes common knowledge, they can't fight against it, right? Those are basically what I'm trying to say is those are weak ass theories to explain something as huge as Terra Preta. Okay. So again, they're concluding that it was a waste and refuse of previously contested Amazonian cities with their very large populations. They had accidentally fertilized the land because of their midden piles, even though other midden piles in other parts of the world are there and they don't have the same agricultural productivity as the Amazonian basin does. How do you after reading all of that, how do you accept that? And that problem is not a lot of people read about it because, again, it's not published. They're too scared to publish, or it just won't pass the fire of current accepted academia. So again, I was saying, and people like Graham Hancock were saying, and others, not just Graham Hancock, other people as well. Even the professor from UCLA was saying this. It makes no sense that large populations came first, right? If they did, how did they feed themselves enough to make huge piles, like I said before? It's more logical that the settlement and expansion of human populations in the Amazon was a planned affair in which the spread of Terra Preta was a precondition for the development of these large settlements. Okay, I said this in the last segment. Not a consequence of it. So again, it's like what happened first, chicken or the egg, but not as not as much of a brain teaser as chicken of an egg. This is I think it's pretty cut and dry. In order to get to that level of midden pile, they needed Terra Preta. It was prerequisite to get that big. Okay, it wasn't that they got big and then Terra Preta happened. That's nonsense. Okay, it just wouldn't happen that way. So Professor Ballet, right? He's one of these guys. He cites the bizarre microbial differences. That's a huge factor, guys. The microbial differences, you wouldn't get that many microbes in just cow manure, right? Or human manure or fish bones, right? You would have to, at some point, you would have to replenish those nutrients. These microbes, you don't need to enhance them any further. That's the crazy thing about it. It's like Gandalf created this or something. Some wizard created this out of nothing. So Professor Bali, he says, he cites the bizarre microbial differences between ADEs and the original unenhanced soils that surround them as evidence for a deliberate human contribution to microbial diversity. Okay, a remarkably intriguing and still living, ever-evolving legacy of the Pre-Columbian Dark Earth people. Okay, so again, who were these Pre-Columbian Dark Earth people? Where did they get the Dark Earth? Right. Well, this is something that needs to be further investigated, but for sure we don't know how it was created. We do know why. We have an idea of why, and we do have bits and pieces of what makes Terra Preta, what makes it special, and it has to do with the microbial and the pH levels, right? So the issue of when exactly Terra Preta first began to be created is, again, there's a lot of confusion, a lot of misinterpretation, a lot of misinformation out there. So if you were to look through the scientific literature, okay, you probably come away with the impression that these anthropogenic soils, again, that's very important. It's fertile anthropogenic soil. It was created by people, okay? It just wasn't something that they found, all right? It's a phenomenon of the past 3,000 years only, meaning if you were to read the scientific literature, you would just be like, okay, this was created sometime in 2000 BC or something like that. But again, if you look closer, there's another mystery here, all right? So that mystery, again, it has to do with the idea that ADEs are produced by human habitation, but unintentionally, and noting that ADE formation ceased in most, if not all, parts of Amazonia during the early contact period. Okay, so the early contact period, again, is around the time of Carvajal and all that stuff, when the New World is being discovered. So it was still being produced by different tribes, right? It was through tradition, whatever it is that you want to say, and because of that, because of the contact with the New World, it just came to a halt, right? Eduardo Neves and his colleagues, they concede that the initiation of ADE formation has been more difficult to explain. So the further they go in, the further they examine it, the more and more difficult it is to explain all of this stuff. All right, guys. So I want to save time, and we will. There's still more about Amazonian Dark Earth that I want to go over. I'll save that for next week. But we are going to go to another break, and then I'll get to some of your questions and comments, and then I'll go over some of the stuff I retweeted, and then we'll call it a day from there, and we'll close the end of the second hour, because we are at the bottom of the hour now, of the second hour. Time really flew. But yeah, if you guys have any comments about, or anything at all that you know about Amazonian Dark Earth, Terra, Preta, please let me know. Send me a tweet, leave a comment. Share an article here and there if you disagree with anything that I said, or if what I said was misleading, which I don't think so. I think I've been pretty cut and dry about what we know and what we don't know and what's being proposed. But anyway, let me know if you guys have any farming experience. Let me know what you guys think from your perspective. We will continue. We'll continue with the listener comments, questions, concerns, all of that stuff. And and I'll see you guys in the next segment here in a second. Guys, I am back for the finals. You know what? We're just going to do the final segment. We're going to do the next 30 minutes of just answering comments, revisiting listener comments, emails, and focusing on a little bit about my Twitter. I don't know. Maybe we'll separate the Twitter and the listener comments. But we've got about 30 minutes left in the transition, or in this transmission, rather. Oh, I forgot to mention the last two songs I played was Outkast, Roses. And this last song you just listened to was the Backstreet Boys, I Want It That Way. And do you guys see the pattern here that's forming? I mean, I'm not just talking about these older songs from the 90s and late 90s, early 2000s. But these songs there's a rhyme and reason to this madness, guys. Roses, right? That obviously that's referring to these the academia, mainstream academia, and their arrogance in their views, and not really being disingenuous with some of their explanations, and not taking into account these anomalies. Okay, and they know about these anomalies, guys. They know. Okay. I Want It That Way has more to do with my, how I would want things to be, rather, right? If everything were to take into account, wouldn't you rather want it to be the way in which truth does surface and is addressed and is accounted for, and like these more advanced, more parsimonious, I love that word, parsimonious, more parsimonious explanations for this paradigm, essentially, of not just Terra, Preta, but just ancient, these addressing the Australasian Melanesian genetic signal coming from these pre-Columbian people of South America, and just really get to the bottom of how this affects other ancient civilizations. Because again, if we could unlock this mystery, let's say, for example, we unlock the mystery, and then we do indeed confirm that South America was the epicenter of these primordial people that came from at some point in the past came from Australasia. What would that mean? Would that be relevant to the Egyptians? Of course it would. It would just open a whole nother door of the advent and the spread of these people, of these ancient people from South America that are clearly by now separate from the Paleo-Indian people, the people who came from Siberia much later, right? So was this, if you guys know much about Zep Tepi, if you guys have heard of Zep Tepi, the Egyptian word for the ancient Egyptian word for the first time, were these people part of the first time? What was their connection to Atlantis? Was Atlantis the chain that linked ancient South America to ancient Egypt and northern Africa and Turkey? Are they all linked? And was the ensuing aftermath of the destruction of so-called Atlantis and the end of the Younger Dryas period, were the Mayans that we know of, were they the remnants? Were the late Egyptians, the early Egyptians rather, that we know, they regarded themselves as the end of their time, right? When we find them, they're fully formed and already functional. It's not like other civilizations where we know they started out small and then they built up to their peak. No, ancient Egypt is very interesting. It's more like we catch the tail end of their history, and which would make sense, right? If they are stragglers from Atlantis, if they are the fragments of this once great nation, great unified culture, whatever it was, this advanced, clearly different, this Pleistocene culture of people, this late Pleistocene culture of people who had different beliefs and different way of life and just a different understanding of the world and and also different technology. It's a very interesting tangled web, guys, but this South America stuff is a huge key. This is a key to our understanding of this stuff in the past, and I talk about it a lot, but I can't emphasize enough how important it is to really understand what seemingly unrelated, right? On the surface, if you just look at the geography, right? South America is separated by a vast ocean between. I mean, is separated from Africa because of the Atlantic. And other oceans as well. If you want to say Indian Ocean, if you want to talk about India as being one of these epicenters, and then you'd have to tack that in there as well as a barrier, right? But again, it doesn't make sense. There's a lot of stuff that doesn't compute, right? Add Terra Preta to the list. Add Göbekli Tepe to the list. Add pyramid structures to the list. Add Oannes and the similarities between Oannes and from Mesopotamia and Quetzalcoatl. They're very similar, guys. They had the man bags, the beards, the fish scaly like attire that they're wearing. I don't think it's all coincidence, guys. It really isn't. Anyway. Let's talk about some of the stuff that I retweeted, and then we'll get into some of the listener comments. So, one thing I retweeted was the Dr. Chandra Wickramasinghe episode with Snake Brothers. Okay, Brothers of the Serpent. If you guys go to my YouTube channel, it's a really great episode. I'm sure I've listened to bits and pieces of it, but I will go back and listen to it after I'm done here. I'm gonna go do some yard work. Probably get a workout in and listen to this interview. And they are going to talk about what we talked about last week, the cosmic origins of viruses, and they're going to go deep into that. I'm sure. The Brothers of the Serpent, very, very great podcast. They also have a podcast called Cosmographia with Randall Carlson. Highly, highly recommend that stuff. As if you guys are looking for more content to consume. What else did I retweet? I retweeted some catch wrestling. So if you guys don't know, I'm a big catch wrestler, submission grappler. I'm a big fan of that stuff. But that is not relevant to what we're talking about. What else? Archaeology magazine. An ancient drainage system made of clay pipes has been unearthed alongside jade artifacts and wheel ruts in central China at the Longshan culture site known as Pinglangtai Ancient City. 4,000-year-old village first discovered in 1980. So China, okay, who knows how old China and the extent of their archaeology is. Again, their government doesn't release everything. But there's rumors have been swirling for decades now that the Chinese, the area of China anyway, not only is it vast, but it's home to a lot of information in terms of ancient history and ancient human history. So now they find this ancient drainage system of clay pipes that's at least 4,000 years old, right? So if that's true, here are some obvious questions. Is that an anomaly? Is this Pinglangtai ancient city the only city to have these clay pipes? Or is it more likely that was just a normal technology that every village had? And I think it's probably the latter, right? Makes a lot of sense. So if you guys want to get a link to that, just go to my Twitter. Again, twitter.com/JustinJG_. That's the one that I'm reading. But you can go to twitter.com/thejindo. That's the official Jindo Twitter. Bitshoot.com/thejindo. And youtube.com/thejindo. Go ahead and subscribe over there if you want to stay posted on all this stuff. But I retweet a lot of interesting articles that I just don't get to. And I think this will probably be, this Neolithic drainage system in China will probably be something I cover more in depth in a future episode. Here's another one. Archaeologists have excavated a cave on the coast of Portugal and discovered a huge structured deposit of remains, including mussels and limpets dating 106,000 to 86,000 years ago. This is from The Guardian, guys. Very interesting stuff. Again, off the coast of Portugal, just that area, the Iberian Peninsula there has been home to very ancient stuff, usually concerning Neanderthals and stuff like that. But the structured deposit of remains, is very indicative. Whenever you see any sort of structure, it's very, very likely that it's driven by some sort of intelligence, and including human intelligence, because humans, we just bring structure. It's just a thing that humans do, right? In varying degrees. So again, that's very interesting as well. I retweeted Bruce Fenton here. So Bruce Fenton tweeted out a luminous extraterrestrial geometric message on the surface of Ceres. So he's talking about, let's just read his quote here. I mean, it could be that someone visited our solar system in the distant past, used luminous chemical compounds to paint a star map onto the largest object in the asteroid belt, and then marked it with a university recognizable geometric symbol. So this is really out there stuff, but I think this is a logical, although it's out there, it is a logical step from where we are, right? This is about 2 or 3 steps removed from where we are now, which is, again, studying these ancient civilizations that had abundant knowledge, and their culture was seemingly built around the cosmos. So if that's established fact, let's just say it is for the sake of this statement, then logically we would look to the stars to see, maybe did they leave some sort of impact there? Or were they looking at something that is peculiar, like the star system of Sirius, for example? Maybe some of these things are have some credence. So I've never been much of an extraterrestrial, like the face on Mars or like the obelisk on the moon or anything like that. I've never really been big on that, because I feel like we haven't earned is a bad word, but I just think that we should get all of our ducks in a row first before we actually go there. But I am happy that Bruce and other people are looking to the stars right now and just seeing what's out there. Archaeology magazine again. 4th century AD Basilica and Beta Samadhi in Ethiopia. Archaeologists unearthed an Aksumite coin. Aksum meaning that ancient form of Christianity or Judaism, depending on who you ask. I think it's Christianity. In Ethiopia, there was a kingdom called Aksum. Well, they found a cross-shaped stone pendant and a bull's head ring, which suggests the coexistence of indigenous pagan beliefs and Christianity from about AD 325. Very interesting stuff. Some very interesting pictures here. I will probably get to that too. Again, there's a lot of stuff in the back burner that I need to get to, and unfortunately, with the crisis going on and people's hours being cut, I've been scrambling to try to sustain myself in real life, like trying to work odd jobs here and there, because I'm lucky to even still have a job right now. A lot of people I know in my personal life and others and professionally, they have lost their jobs completely. They have no income now. I've been reduced. My income has been hugely reduced, but I've been trying to find odd jobs here and there for some extra cash. So yeah, logically, it would make sense that I would be able to churn out more and more content during this quarantine period, this lull in economic activity. But actually, it's the opposite. It's a lot of me scrambling and trying to make ends meet while things are going on. So, but if I did have the time, I would definitely just be going through every day a lot, just my backlog. I've got probably close to 50 to 60 articles that I've been meaning to do videos on, but I just can't. There's so much interesting stuff, guys, and that's why I retweet some of this stuff, just so you guys can kind of get a head start and read. So yeah, I highly recommend you guys look at this. A lot of interesting pictures here. A lot of there's coins and all this other stuff too, rings, and again, this bowl symbolism. I wonder what Martin Sweatman would think about this, about the symbolism there. And before that, another one from Archaeology Magazine, which, by the way, at Archaeology Mag on Twitter, I would highly recommend you follow this. And this will be the last one I do before I get to your comments. Researchers have discovered 2 small carved stones thought to date to between 14,000 and 26,000 years ago in Indonesia's Liang Bulu Batu cave, which is etched with an image of an anoa, which is a dwarf buffalo unique to the region. So again, 14,000 to 26,000 years ago, Indonesia was creating these interesting symbols. People in Indonesia, anyway. And again, I wonder, right? I wonder how much of this is Homo erectus, right? That interesting erectus. I don't even know if I should even call it erectus, just because their brain cases were different. Anyway, I talk a lot about, whenever Indonesia comes up, I always have to talk about that anomalous erectus skulls that they found there near Java, because those are. It's hard to classify that as classical erectus. It might be something else. It might be. There was a comment that I had. I think it was Eric Dondero. I think he was mentioned that it's hard to lump them all together. We should just call them just Homo human, right? Because they were all viable. They were all able to intermate and have viable offspring. So how do you classify that as a species? Anyway. So, and then this last one from Sacred Geometry International. Scientists agree Younger Dryas impact event wiped out ancient civilization. Yeah, that has to do with Abu Herrera and the fragmented comet from Comet Enki. How it's led to these 40 plus YDB Younger Dryas boundary impact sites. And if you guys want to know more about that, you guys should totally check that out. We are going to go to our final break, and then I'm going to get to your listener comments for the last segment, and then I'll sign off here. So just stay tuned. I'll be back with you in a second. Guys, welcome back to the final segment. Thank you so much if you guys have been listening this entire time. If you're listening live, thank you so much for tuning in. If you're listening from the United States, UK, New Zealand, Denmark, Sweden, wherever you are, why don't you holler at me right now on Twitter? I would like to know who you are. No, I'm just kidding. But no, thank you so much for tuning in. I felt like this has been a great episode. And without further ado, let's just get to your listener comments. So the first one that I have is from Mr. Pavel Datsuk. He posted a few things, but the link that he posted was from Nature. This is published on October 14, 2015. This is 5 years ago. The earliest unequivocally modern humans in southern China, right? So let's just read through the abstract here really quick. The hominin record from southern Asia for the early late Pleistocene epoch is scarce. Well-dated and well-preserved fossils older than 45,000 years can be unequivocally attributed to Homo sapiens are lacking. Here we present evidence from the newly excavated Fuyuan cave, which I talked about in my last episode a few days ago, in Daoxian, southern China. So again, this would be that ecozone, the oriental ecozone that I talked about. This site has provided 47 human teeth dated to more than 80,000 years old, and with an inferred maximum age of 120,000 years. The morphological and metric assessment of the sample supports its unequivocal assignment to Homo sapiens. The Daoxian sample is more derived than any other anatomically modern human, resembling middle to late Pleistocene. specimens and even contemporary humans. Our study shows that fully modern morphologies were present in southern China 30 to 70,000 years earlier than in the Levant and Europe. Okay, that's huge. Okay, because if you think of the conventional out of Africa theory, then you would assume that the Levant and Europe would have been first as they branched out east, but that's not the case. Okay, so again, if you follow Bruce Fenton's work, this is another tack on in favor of the out of Australia theory. They came from east to west, not west to east. Anyway, our data fill a chronological and geographical gap that is relevant for understanding when Homo sapiens first appeared in southern Asia. The Daojian teeth also support the hypothesis that during the same period, southern China was inhabited by more derived populations in central and northern China. And again, central and northern China, I talked about those populations from the Palearctic ecozone. They came later. Why did they come later? Most likely because that area before then, for a meaningful period of time, was uninhabitable to human population. So much so that they wouldn't migrate through that area. This evidence is important for the study of dispersal routes of modern humans. Finally, results are relevant to exploring the reasons for the relatively late entry of Homo sapiens into Europe. Some studies have investigated how the competition with Homo sapiens may have caused Neanderthals' extinction. Notably, though, although fully modern humans were already present in southern China at least as early as 80,000 years ago, there is no evidence that they entered Europe before 45,000 years ago. This could indicate that Neanderthalensis was indeed an additional ecological barrier for modern humans. That's interesting. Maybe modern humans couldn't get past the Neanderthal, their stronghold, their country. Maybe they had a country. Maybe they had something there, but Homo sapiens weren't going in there on a large scale anyway. And that was part of the reason why there was that initial failed migration out of Africa, allegedly, that was rebuffed by Neanderthals. That was the early implication anyway. This could indicate that again, Neanderthals were an ecological barrier for modern humans who could only enter Europe when the demise of Neanderthals had already started around 45,000 years ago. Great comment, Mr. Datsuk. Thank you so much. If you guys want to find that, it's in my most recent article or my most recent video. Definitely upvote that. It's a great comment. Oh my God, we only have 5 minutes. So, time traveler. My question is, and I have asked before, why do Asians look the way they do? If modern African Homo sapiens walked out of Africa into the Middle East and Europe and Asia, shouldn't they all look alike? Yes, the color would be different, but if you see European and Asians are very different, and that is true. I think that's the most obvious question that comes up. So yeah, why is there such a discrepancy in their phenotypes, right? Asian people almost without fail, they have dark features, dark eyes and dark hair, right? They have a certain look to them. And again, if you guys watch that video, the explanation is that that's why China is so anomalous, because it occupies 2 ecozones with very different organisms that had their own, I guess, ecological echo chamber, essentially, because of the geographical barriers, and that includes humans as well. That's why the Mongols, a lot of stories say that Temujin or Genghis Khan had red hair and green eyes. Totally not Asian features, right? So again, very, very peculiar stuff. Again, we have these puzzle pieces that seemingly are unrelated, but are related upon further investigation. Rowan O'Neill, LOL Mind Virus. Ever heard of Tool the band? Of course I've heard of Tool. Maynard James Keenan is amazing. Their new album is called Fear Inoculum. The idea you inoculate people with thought or a meme or something. Yeah, these thought memes, thought viruses have been around since humans have been around, essentially. Cool video. Keep up the good content. Thank you, Tim. David Peters, old school commenter David Peters, regarding wise elders. The second major visitation of the Black Death in 1363 in England was said to have mainly afflicted children and young people who have acquired no immunity from the 1346 pestilence, leaving a population with an average age greater at any time before or since. We became a nation of middle-aged people. By the early 1400s, it is said by some that there was more free thinking going on in England than we have today. Think of Chaucer. Absolutely. A scenario where the youth were being provoked to engage in out-of-the-box thinking by numerous elders. Very interesting insight there. In 1405, the parliamentarians of London called upon the King, Henry IV, to dispossess the church of its property and give it to the common people. This resulted in the introduction of draconian heresy laws to quell the movement. Very interesting stuff, David. Very interesting stuff. And yeah, the Black Death definitely is an incident in which it changes the demographic of the people, and it essentially from there it changes the direction at which their culture develops. And if you remove a generation essentially of people, then that is definitely going to alter the course of their development in an otherwise in a direction that they wouldn't have otherwise, right? If that generation was there. Okay, guys, thank you. I should have managed the time better here, but thank you so much for tuning in. I will try my best to have another episode out. It's getting really hard out there, guys, and if you guys are out of work, my heart goes out to you. I understand how difficult it is. If you have hours cut like me, my heart goes out to you, trying to find gigs and just things to keep the boat up. But I think I have been maintaining a pretty good pace of giving you guys, at the very least, 2.5 hours of content a week. If I had it my way and I had the resources and the time, I would be doing. I'd be putting out episodes probably every weekday at least, like I did in the past. I think I went a good 7 months of just churning out 4 episodes a week. I would like to get back to those levels. God knows I have a lot of stuff in the pipe. But again, enjoy the rest of your day. Enjoy the rest of your time off and try to make the most of your time. Thank you. God bless. And I'll see you guys next week.